Brother Mike, thank you very, very much. And I somewhat ashamedly and embarrassingly have to say that I have never heard a presentation that describes love as the ultimate pattern. And it's not like the Bible doesn't say it. But I know as we were talking about what this topic could look like, we were describing it as one of many. And I really appreciate that you showed the preeminence of love and why it deserves that spot. And so thank you for that. We'll open it up to questions. If you have a question for Mike, for a brother in the church, please raise your hand and Ramsey will bring you the microphone. We'll start with Bart.
That was awesome, brother. Thank you. Dreamed about what this presentation would be like, and it was everything I dreamed of. It was amazing. Recent years and events have, caused heartache in the brotherhood for many of us because we've seen a lack of love for people that have fallen into sin and needed help. And so I appreciate that so much. And, we keep the pattern. And I guess at least the question I have is the Ephesian brethren in Revelation. And I just like your opinion, because if you look at it one way, it supports what you're saying. Because the Ephesians, the church at Ephesus, they had done all the right patterns in doctrine. They had contested false apostles. They had, searched out the truth. They had resisted sin. They had done all these things, but you have left your first love. And I heard in my youth, I always heard that meant they just didn't really have enough love for Jesus. They didn't have enough love for Jesus, and they needed to go back and do the first works. And that always was mysterious to me, because I was setting out listening, and they did all this doctrinal, they made sure that there weren't any false teachers teaching a false doctrine. The doctrine was pure. So what's it mean to love Jesus more than that? And I think in my later years, I think it's having to do with the brethren. They're showing their love for the Lord by keeping the commandments, but when it came to the brethren, they were disregarding, and maybe it was acts of hatred, acts of spite, or just not. I love your tangible point you made several times. Maybe they weren't doing tangible works for brethren. I just thought to get your
I think you're right. I mean, I think there could be several things going on there. First of all, you're right. They may not have had the right emotion. I'm not going to discount that. But let's say they were doing all of those works correctly, logistically, but they didn't have a real love for God. Maybe they didn't really have the heart in it, which goes back to your first point. But what if even in maintaining doctrinal purity, they were doing it out of hate for their brother? Again, we can't judge necessarily motives, but your first statement when you first started was about the difficulties in brotherhood. Sometimes I do wonder, and again, I have to be careful, don't want to get on this horse and ride it and let it get away with me, but I do wonder, what's our motivation sometimes? 1 Corinthians, when Paul rebukes that brother over there, and then in 2 Corinthians, most believe he's coming back, it's all out of love. It's all, at least ostensibly, to bring him back. Not to drive him away, but to bring him back. And, if we have the right love for one another on the front end, it's going to be much easier to bring them back on the other end if they do fall, because they'll have something to go back to. The problem today is I think people feel a little bit estranged from their brothers and sisters to Christ. So when something happens, they're like, well, I'm done with you. And they're gone. You're not going to bring them back because they never really had any love there to begin with. So, yeah, I think the church at Ephesus is a very interesting situation. Yeah.
I really appreciate presentation very much, but you said something, we serve God, but we serve Christ when we serve others. Could you expand on that a little bit? I really like that point.
Yeah, I think that's what Matthew 25, those passages are all about. Jesus doesn't have to literally be there for us to be serving him when we do our acts of charity or acts of kindness. I think there used to be a country music song, and I wouldn't begin to try to quote it, but it talks about, I saw Christ today. And I don't remember how it went, but it was like, in that little girl, that little boy who somebody was feeding, That was a Christ act. And how else are we going to show our love except for what we do? I mean, Bill, I love you. I can say that, but unless I come and hug you or something, how do you know? Or if I see you in need, unless I help you, how do you know? So I think the idea there is putting it in a tangible form, a real form, which is what James was talking about too. You see your brother in danger and brother in dire need, and you don't do anything but just give him platitudes. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent job, Mike. There's a lot of rumblings in the religious world right now about annihilationism, and people are really starting to question the doctrine of hell. So I guess my question to you is, how can a loving God send someone to hell?
Well, you have to weigh also the other characteristics of God. While God is supremely love, he is also justice. He is also all of those other characteristics. And so it's not one or the other. It is how do you factor those together. And of course, a loving God is going to reward, I think, those who are living correctly, but it would not be justice or would not even be loving to also reward the evil. So I think you've got to balance, or at least compare and contrast those two immutable characteristics, and it's not one or the other. Again, God doesn't really send anybody to hell. I realize, that's kind of the way we phrase it, but we actually choose. If we've heard Christ, we've chosen to accept or reject him. So when Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, no man comes to the Father except for me, through me, that's a choice we then make. So, we could also go into the issue of, hell was never prepared for humans. It was prepared for the devil and his angels. That's a whole other theological thing too. So I think there's plenty of scriptures that demonstrate that God can be both perfect love, but also perfect justice at the same time. So, it's a good question.
Other questions? Well, I'll ask one, and y'all can be thinking about yours, because we need some more here. My question is this: what keeps us from love? Oftentimes we say love, and we don't often practice it, as you said. And Jesus, I was going to say, teaches on this ad nauseum, but there's always more to be said about the expressions of love. And so whenever we see the examples, like, for example, what you talked about in Matthew 25, we encounter that all the time. What keeps us from showing love?
My knee-jerk reaction is selfishness, which is really self-worship. We set ourselves up as the idol to fill our own needs, when that was never the purpose of God making us to begin with. We're so pleasure-oriented in our culture, me-oriented, narcissistic-oriented, when in reality, our only purpose in life, and I'm coming to see this more and more as I get old, and I'm old, the only purpose in life is to serve God. Fear God, keep his commandments, Ecclesiastes says. That's the whole, that's the package of man. And I think that last section there in Ecclesiastes 12 really sums it up well. So I think it's a narcissism, a self-worship, a self-idolization. I think everything else falls underneath that. That would be my knee-jerk reaction answer.
So do you have any closing comments?
No, just thanks. This thing morphed. I did send Bart the paper that I started writing. And I got to tell you a little anecdote. So I wrote this 23-page paper, and I almost never write anything when I do a sermon. I just get up and preach. But I decided to write this presentation first, so I sent it to Bart. So I sent it to my friend in the UK. I won't tell who it is. And he's a very dear friend, but he's very dry. And he sat back rebuking me. He said, and he counted up the words in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And he said, Jesus said it like this, and 2,000 words, and you use 23 pages. So I said, yeah, guilty. Of course, he and I have that relationship, so. Yeah, a lot more could be said, a lot less could be said too. But thanks, I enjoyed the topic. And I'll have the PowerPoint if anybody wants it, for what it's worth.